The concept of an art heist might sound like something created in Hollywood, with masked men rappelling down from the skylight, vanishing into the night with millions of dollars of stolen jewels and artwork. This is just a fiction, a story spun in Hollywood, right? In September of 1972, 3 masked men broke into the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. They stole over $2 million in art and artifacts, and despite being one of the largest art heists in history, most people have never heard of this daring theft. Today we are going to discuss the ins and outs of this heist, the follow-up, and some theories about this unsolved cold case. My name is Christeah, and this is the Skylight Caper.
Police in Montreal are looking for 3 men who escaped with $2 million worth of art objects from the city's Museum of Fine Arts this morning.
The year was 1972. Canada's hockey team was going head-to-head against the USSR in the '72 Summit Series, and the Munich Summer Olympics were in full swing. At the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, a skylight was being repaired over the Hornstein Pavilion, which overlooked works by such illustrious artists as Rembrandt and Renoir. The skylight was usually alarmed, but due to the repairs, a plastic sheet had covered the sensor, rendering it useless. On September 4th, just after midnight, a man used climbing spurs to scale a large tree between the museum and the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul. He made his way onto the roof of the museum, and from there lowered a ladder so that his 2 masked compatriots could join him above the skylight. With the security sensor neutralized, the intruders rappelled through the window unobserved and into the galleries below. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, the trio encountered their first security guard, who would later report that 2 of these men spoke French and 1 spoke English. The intruders demanded that he get on the floor, firing a shot into the ceiling when he did not immediately comply. The noise alerted the 2 other security guards on duty, but they too were quickly overcome. The trio bound and gagged the guards before going about their business, and their business was theft. With the guards neutralized, they were welcome to take their pick of the museum's displayed collections. Pricey paintings by Renoir, Deheme, and Rembrandt, and smaller, valuable items that were inset with gems and gold. One of the thieves stood watch over the bound security guards, gun in hand, while the other 2 got to work. One began to smash open display cases and fill his pockets with expensive jewelry and artifacts, while the other began to cut paintings out of their fragile frames, some of which were centuries old. The pair made a small pile by one of the doors with everything they intended to take with them, about 30 paintings and dozens of pieces of jewelry and silver. Once they'd gathered their loot, the thieves began their escape back out through the skylight. They'd arranged an intricate rig of pulleys that was set to hoist them out of the galleries, but they would quickly realize that it was too complicated and time-consuming. Thinking on their feet, the thieves took a set of keys from a security guard and used that to unlock a panel van belonging to the museum. But this proved to be a mistake, because one of the thieves triggered a door alarm on their way to the garage.
This black door right behind me here is the one that set off the burglar alarm.
The thieves, now frantically collecting whatever they could carry as the alarm finally screeched into action, ran out with armfuls of paintings and stolen artifacts, escaping the museum on foot. Meanwhile, one of the security guards managed to free himself from his bindings and call the police. But by the time that the police and the alerted museum staff began arriving, the thieves were long gone, leaving behind a mess of smashed display cases, crumbled antique frames, and the tools of their thievery. In total, the thieves made off with 18 paintings, including a Rembrandt that was deemed to be worth about $1 million at the time of the theft. In addition, they also made off with about 39 artifacts, all items that could be easily dismantled and sold. Now, this is a Hollywood-level theft, but to me, the most interesting thing is everything that came after, especially as many parts of this heist are still wrapped in mystery. While word of this heist spread across the country, it was not treated like a major story, as bigger news dominated the headlines. While these reports about the theft were left to the later pages of most newspapers, Canadians were glued to their television sets the day after the Skylight Caper due to an unfolding situation at the Munich Summer Olympics.
From ABC headquarters just outside the Olympic Village in Munich, West Germany.
Few newspapers spared coveted front-page real estate for the story about the stolen paintings and artifacts, and instead shared the far more tragic and sensational story about the Munich terrorist attack, where 16 people were taken hostage and killed. Even local news outlets were preoccupied with the Bluebird Cafe arson that had killed 37 people prior to the heist, dominating Montreal's headlines. But despite the lack of news coverage, the story of the Skylight Caper wasn't over quite yet. Local and international police continued their search for the thieves in the following weeks, especially as they believed the paintings were still in Montreal. The first lead came a few short days after the heist in the shape of a phone call. The museum security director, Donald Youngson, was instructed to go to a phone booth near McGill University. Once the telephone rang, he picked it up and a, quote, nasally European voice gave him a fairly odd instruction to pick up a piece of nearby garbage, specifically a discarded cigarette pack. The cigarette pack was much heavier than it should have been, and when the security director looked inside, he saw the gleam of a pendant, one of the stolen artifacts. This was no longer just a simple theft, but a hostage situation that the thieves were using to try and exploit the museum and the police. More communication came from the thieves by both phone and even traditional mail. About a month after the heist, a brown envelope arrived containing a photograph that pictured all of the stolen art piled together. Interestingly, the envelope was labeled Port of Montreal, which sprouted a number of new theories about the intentions behind the heist. Were they going to be exporting this to some faraway private buyer? It should also be noted that the Port of Montreal was under the thumb of the West End gang, so it was theorized that maybe this was related to mob activity. Or was this all simply just a bluff? Then came the ransom. If the museum coughed up 250 grand, all the paintings would be returned. No problem. In one of his conversations with the thieves, then museum director David Carter suggested that the thieves return one of the paintings in order to prove that they hadn't already been sold. The thieves agreed to this, and Youngson was once again sent out into the city to a preordained meeting place, this time at Gare Centrale. The security director was instructed to check a specific locker in the station where one of the paintings awaited him, Landscape with Cattle and Vehicles by Brueghel. All things considered, communication between the museum and the thieves was ongoing, and it seemed like the items were slowly being returned, albeit one by one. But everything would change at the next rendezvous. In an attempt to trade cash for another painting, Carter set up a meeting with the thieves, but this time the middleman was going to be an undercover cop. The plainclothes officer made it to the meeting place, but a police cruiser drove by, unaware of the operation. It spooked the thieves and disrupted the deal. Reportedly, the thieves called the museum the next day and angrily accused them of setting up a trap, which was true, but they did spring the wrong one. But what little goodwill had been collected between the museum and the thieves was now gone. Whether they hid the paintings away or turned to another buyer is still a mystery to this day. But there was one more attempt by someone to extort the museum for money in exchange for those stolen items. In the summer of 1973, an anonymous caller contacted one of the museum's board members, insisting that they knew where these paintings were. Their price for this information? $10,000. An insurance adjuster was sent out with 10 grand in an unmarked envelope to make the exchange. From there, he spent the next several hours going from phone booth to phone booth, before finally dropping the cash in a vacant lot on St. Martin Boulevard at around 4 in the morning. After dropping the cash, he returned to the phone booth as instructed, but the phone never rang. At least, not right away. The following morning, his office phone rang, and he was told that the paintings were being stored at a motel in Laval. The police scoured this building, but not even a paint chip was found. This phone call in 1973 would be the last time that anyone heard from anyone connected to this heist, and the case has been cold ever since. The more I looked into this caper, the blurrier the details became. It was even difficult just to find a complete list of all of this stolen artifacts, because most of the media attention that this received directed people's attention towards the more famous and valuable paintings. The theories about where they ended up are numerous. Some suggest the involvement of large international crime rings, while others suggest that this was done on a much smaller scale. At one point during the initial investigation, a handful of local art students were questioned, and even the museum staff were theorized to have been involved. To me, though, the most credible theory follows an individual named Smith, who years after the heist seemed to have come into some money and seemed to know a lot about the heist, specifically things that only investigators were privy to. He was questioned, but ultimately went to the grave with his secrets. This story has more questions than answers. Where did the paintings end up? Were the artifacts quietly pawned at antique shops around Montreal? Was the mob involved? The frustrating truth is, despite there being no shortage of theories, is that we just don't know. There is also the matter of the museum itself. Other notable institutions with robberies, like the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, have leaned into the story of their burglary by leaving the empty frames on display to act not only as a reminder of these stolen paintings, but as a symbol of hope that perhaps one day they might be returned. But as I researched the Skylight Caper, I began to wonder why the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts is so hesitant to even mention the heist. To me, it appears the museum has wished to forget that this caper ever happened. There is no mention of the theft on their website, and the publicly available collections database has no mention of the paintings that were stolen, not even the one that was returned. In 2010, Bill Banty, a representative of the museum during the theft, said, "Everyone forgot about the theft except for the insurance companies. Like a death in the family, you have to let it drop." But there are some of us who aren't content with that. Like an itch that needs to be scratched, we crave answers. These paintings could have been studied and led to new discoveries, but they were stolen from the people of Montreal. They were stolen from those of us who value history and art. I think the museum has a really interesting opportunity to reignite the public's interest in the stolen items and the theft. If they did, it might even lead to their recovery after all these decades. But will we ever see these paintings again? Maybe, but it requires us to remember them in the first place.